James had always taken pride in his front yard vegetable garden, a lush and thriving space filled with rows of tomatoes, peppers, squash, and herbs that provided fresh produce for his family and neighbors. For years, it had been a peaceful oasis in his suburban community, a reminder of his grandfather's love for gardening and self-sufficiency. However, everything changed when Nancy Thompson, the domineering president of the local Homeowners Association, HOA, set her sights on him. It started with letters, cold, impersonal warnings stuffed into his mailbox, citing vague infractions against the HOA's landscaping rules. James, who had always known his property was legally exempt from HOA regulations due to a grandfather clause in his deed, ignored them at first, assuming it was a simple misunderstanding. But Nancy wasn't the type to let things go. The letters escalated into official notices demanding fines, and soon she was showing up at his door, clipboard in hand, her sharp eyes scanning his yard with clear disdain. "This is unacceptable," she declared, pointing at the rows of flourishing vegetables as though they were weeds. "You're bringing down property values. The HOA has strict rules about front yard aesthetics." James countered with calm logic, explaining that his home had existed long before the HOA and that he was legally not bound to their regulations. But Nancy dismissed his argument, insisting that the rules applied to everyone. What began as a nuisance soon turned into full-blown harassment, with Nancy sending hired inspectors to his property, fining him for imaginary violations, and even trying to turn his neighbors against James knew Nancy was relentless, but he never expected her to go to such extreme lengths. One fateful morning, he awoke to the rumble of heavy machinery outside his window. Peering out, he was stunned to see not one, not two, but three massive bulldozers idling in front of his house. Standing beside them, arms crossed, was Nancy, flanked by several HOA board members and a lawyer, Robert Taylor, who had been complicit in her schemes for years. "James, you've been given ample warning," Nancy said with a smirk. "The HOA is exercising its right to enforce community standards. Your illegal garden is being removed today." James felt a cold rage settle in his chest. He stepped onto his porch, fists clenched, as he called out, "You have no right to do this. My property isn't under HOA jurisdiction." But Nancy merely gestured to the bulldozer operator, signaling him to start. Just as the machine roared to life, a voice rang out from across the street. "Stop this nonsense immediately." It was Eleanor Ramos, James's elderly neighbor, an outspoken woman who had lived in the community since before the HOA even existed. She stormed toward the scene, her frail yet determined presence carrying the weight of someone who had seen enough injustice for a lifetime. "Nancy, you've been bullying this neighborhood for years. We all know the HOA has no authority over his land." Other neighbors began emerging from their homes, murmuring in agreement. James could see the uncertainty flicker in the bulldozer operator's eyes. But Nancy, undeterred, doubled down. "This is an HOA matter. You have no say in this, Eleanor." The tension was thick in the air. James knew this battle had only just begun. The days following the near demolition of his garden, James delved deeper into his property's history. He combed through old documents, consulted with a local lawyer, and made a shocking discovery. His family had retained more than just a grandfather clause exempting them from HOA rules. When his ancestors had sold the land for development, they had retained mineral rights and utility easements, meaning that, legally, his property was in a unique category that the HOA had no jurisdiction over whatsoever. Armed with this newfound knowledge, James took his case to the county clerk's office, determined to put an end to Nancy's harassment once and for all. What he didn't expect was just how quickly things would escalate once the authorities got involved. The county clerk, upon reviewing the records, confirmed James's claims and was visibly irritated at the HOA's blatant overreach. "This is a clear violation," the clerk stated, shaking her head. "Not only is your property exempt, but the HOA had no right to issue fines or even threaten you with enforcement." That same day, James contacted the county sheriff's office, presenting them with the evidence. And just like that, the tables turned. By the end of the week, the sheriff himself accompanied the clerk to James's property, where Nancy and Robert were forced to stand by as they were informed, in no uncertain terms, that any further action against James's garden would result in legal consequences. It was a moment of triumph, but James knew Nancy wasn't one to back down easily. While James had won a significant victory, the fight was far from over. Eleanor, sensing that this was just the tip of the iceberg, began digging into HOA financial records, enlisting the help of a few other longtime residents who had grown weary of Nancy's reign of terror. What they found was worse than anyone had imagined. The HOA's funds were in complete disarray, with thousands of dollars unaccounted for. Among the most damning discoveries was evidence that Nancy and Robert had embezzled over $300,000 that had originally been allocated for a pool renovation project, money that had mysteriously vanished. Even worse, there were documented instances of Nancy issuing fraudulent fines to elderly homeowners, systematically forcing them to sell their properties at below-market prices, only for those homes to be purchased by her close associates. It was a scheme built on intimidation, deception, and financial exploitation. With undeniable proof in hand, Eleanor and James took their findings to the community, organizing an emergency neighborhood meeting. Residents packed into a local recreation center, where the shocking revelations were laid bare. Gasps filled the room as neighbors realized they had been victims of a years-long scam. The once powerful Nancy sat in stunned silence, while Robert's face turned pale as he realized the severity of the situation. But just as the meeting reached its peak, Nancy stood abruptly, her voice dripping with venom. "You think this is over?" she hissed at James. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." It was a chilling threat, one that James took seriously. Nancy's threat wasn't an empty one. That very night, under the cover of darkness, James's garden was reduced to ruins. When he stepped outside the next morning, his heart sank at the devastation before him. Every carefully tended plant had been uprooted, the soil churned as though a storm had torn through it. His garden beds were smashed, irrigation lines severed, and the small wooden fence he had built around it lay in broken splinters. But what Nancy and Robert hadn't accounted for was the security cameras James had installed days earlier. The footage was undeniable. There they were, caught in the act, vandalizing his property with reckless abandon. James wasted no time. He called the police, presented the evidence, and within hours, arrest warrants were issued. News outlets caught wind of the unfolding scandal, turning it into a headline-worthy exposé on HOA corruption. Reporters descended upon the neighborhood, interviewing outraged residents and shining a national spotlight on the depths of Nancy and Robert's corruption. The final nail in the coffin came when the county district attorney, seeing the over-why. With Nancy and Robert exposed, the neighborhood erupted in both outrage and determination. What had once been a community controlled by fear and manipulation now had a chance to rebuild itself. James, alongside Eleanor and other longtime residents, took the lead in organizing a special HOA meeting, one that would determine the future of their neighborhood. The turnout was overwhelming. Dozens of homeowners packed into the clubhouse, many clutching copies of the financial documents Eleanor had uncovered, their faces etched with frustration and anger. The remaining HOA board members, many of whom had either turned a blind eye to Nancy's corruption or actively participated in it, sat rigid and uneasy at the front of the room. The meeting began with testimony from multiple residents, each detailing years of unjust fines, intimidation, and deception. Elderly homeowners spoke about how they had been pressured to sell their homes for far less than market value. Younger families described how they had been bullied into costly, unnecessary modifications to their properties. One after another, voices rose in condemnation of Nancy's regime. Finally, it was time for action. A motion was put forth to dissolve the existing HOA leadership entirely. The vote was swift and unanimous. The corrupt board members were officially removed, and for the first time in years, the community felt a sense of relief. But there was still much work to be. With the old leadership gone, James and a handful of other trusted residents were appointed as an interim committee to oversee the transition. Their first order of business was to rewrite the HOA rules, ensuring that no future board would have unchecked power. They eliminated the most oppressive regulations, including the arbitrary restrictions on front yard gardens, and implemented transparency measures that required all financial records to be publicly accessible. The new rules also protected elderly homeowners from being pressured into selling their properties, forbidding any predatory practices that had plagued the neighborhood under Nancy's rule. Meanwhile, James's destroyed garden became a rallying point for the community. Dozens of neighbors came together to help him rebuild, bringing soil, seeds, and tools to restore what had been lost. Within days, the once ruined space was teeming with new life, a testament to the power of unity and resilience. But the changes weren't just symbolic. Real legal action was underway. Investigators dug deeper into Nancy and Robert's financial crimes, uncovering further evidence of misappropriated funds. The $300,000 meant for the community pool had been funneled into personal accounts, and additional fraudulent transactions revealed that their corruption ran even deeper than originally thought. With Nancy gone and the community taking back control, a sense of celebration filled the air. To mark this turning point, James proposed an idea that quickly gained traction: a neighborhood block party. It would be held in the very yard that had once belonged to Nancy, a symbolic reclaiming of the space that she had ruled with an iron fist. The day of the event, families filled the street, bringing tables of food, music, and decorations. Children played in front yards without fear of arbitrary HOA citations, and neighbors who had once been too intimidated to speak out now laughed and shared stories openly. The garden, freshly restored, was the centerpiece of the gathering, a representation of everything they had fought for. Eleanor, who had played such a crucial role in uncovering the corruption, was honored with a plaque recognizing her bravery and dedication to the community. As the evening wore on, James stood before the crowd, raising a toast. "This isn't just about a garden," he said. "It's about standing up for what's right, about taking back what belongs to us, and about making sure no one like Nancy ever gets to control our lives again." Cheers erupted, and for the first time in years, the neighborhood truly felt like a home again. While the neighborhood was moving forward, Nancy's troubles were just beginning. The evidence against her was overwhelming, and the legal system wasted no time in taking action. She faced multiple charges, including embezzlement, fraud, vandalism, and trespassing. Robert, her right-hand man, also found himself ensnared in the legal battle, his law license under threat as investigators uncovered his role in covering up financial misdeeds. The once feared HOA president now sat in a courtroom, her arrogance replaced by desperation as she pleaded for leniency. But the judge had little sympathy. The money she had stolen had hurt real people, and the damage she had inflicted on the community was undeniable. In the end, Nancy was sentenced to several years in prison, with a hefty fine imposed to repay the stolen funds. Her house, once a symbol of her authority, was seized and auctioned off to cover part of the damages. Meanwhile, Robert's law firm cut ties with him, and he faced disbarment proceedings that all but ensured his career was over. News of the case spread beyond the neighborhood, serving as a cautionary tale of HOA corruption and the power of community resistance. As the months passed, the neighborhood continued to thrive under its new leadership. The once dreaded HOA had transformed into a transparent and fair organization, one that actually served the interests of the residents rather than exploiting them. James's garden flourished, becoming more than just a source of fresh produce. It became a community gathering place. Neighbors came together for gardening workshops, children learned how to grow their own food, and the space became a symbol of their collective victory. What had once been a battle against tyranny had evolved into a movement of empowerment, proving that when people stand together, they can overcome even the most entrenched corruption. Looking out over his thriving yard one morning, James reflected on everything that had happened. The fight had been long and difficult, but it had been worth it. He had stood his ground, not just for himself, but for his entire community. And in the end, the garden that Nancy had tried so hard to destroy had become the heart of neighborhood reborn. As the neighborhood settled into its new era of fairness and cooperation, James's garden became more than just a patch of cultivated land. It became a beacon of change. What had once been a personal project had now turned into a community space where neighbors gathered, children learned about growing food, and the elderly found a place to share their wisdom. With the HOA's oppressive rules overturned, other residents felt emboldened to start their own gardens, transforming the neighborhood into a lush, green haven. What had once been a sterile, rule-bound subdivision now thrived with vibrant colors, fresh scents, and a renewed sense of purpose. The community began organizing monthly gardening days where people would help one another with their yards, exchanging seeds, stories, and laughter. Local schools even got involved, with students visiting James's garden for lessons on sustainability and self-sufficiency. The space that Nancy had tried so hard to destroy had, in the end, brought the neighborhood closer together than ever before. After the dissolution of the corrupt HOA board, the community needed a way to ensure fair governance moving forward. Instead of reinstating the old, rigid HOA structure, the residents voted to form a neighborhood council, a more inclusive and transparent governing body where every homeowner had a voice. Unlike the previous regime, where power was hoarded by a select few, this new council operated democratically, with open meetings and community-led decision-making. James, despite his reluctance to take on an official role, was voted in as one of the council members, alongside Eleanor and several other respected neighbors. Their first major decision was to audit all remaining HOA funds and redirect them to long-overdue community projects. The abandoned pool renovation finally moved forward, with construction plans underway to turn it into a recreational space that would actually benefit the residents. The new council also established clear financial oversight measures, ensuring that no future leader could exploit the community the way Nancy had. With these reforms in place, trust was restored, and for the first time in years, people felt they truly had control over their own homes and futures. Although Nancy was already facing prison time for embezzlement and fraud, the full extent of her legal troubles was only beginning to unfold. The state's Financial Crimes Unit had launched a deeper investigation, uncovering additional illegal dealings that extended beyond the neighborhood. As it turned out, Nancy and Robert had been involved in similar schemes in other communities, manipulating HOA funds for personal gain and coercing elderly homeowners into selling their properties at unfair prices. These new revelations led to even more charges, further ensuring that neither of them would escape accountability. Meanwhile, the neighborhood moved forward with a class action lawsuit to recover the stolen money, with James and Eleanor leading the charge. The case gained statewide attention, setting a legal precedent for holding corrupt HOA officials accountable. As the lawsuit progressed, Nancy's ill-gotten assets were seized, and the money was gradually returned to the community. By the time the case was settled, the neighborhood had reclaimed nearly every stolen dollar, which was reinvested into new amenities, further cementing their victory. The experience of fighting back against corruption had fundamentally changed the neighborhood. Where fear and intimidation had once ruled, unity and cooperation now flourished. James, who had once seen himself as just a guy trying to grow vegetables, had become an unlikely leader in the fight for justice. Eleanor, once dismissed as just an elderly neighbor, was now recognized as a hero for her relentless pursuit of the truth. And the residents, who had once been divided by fear of HOA retaliation, had grown into a tight-knit community where people looked out for one another. Block parties became a regular occurrence, front porches were filled with conversations, and even simple acts of kindness, like helping a neighbor repair a fence or water their plants, became common practice. The fight had been hard-won, but it had forged something stronger than any rulebook ever could, a true sense of belonging. Months after Nancy's downfall, James stood in his garden, reflecting on how much had changed. The soil beneath his fingers was the same, the plants still reached toward the sun, but the air felt different, lighter, freer. He no longer had to worry about arbitrary fines or threats. He no longer had to fear that his hard work would be undone by petty power struggles. The garden, once a battleground, was now a testament to resilience. As he looked around, he saw his neighbors tending to their own gardens, children playing in yards that had once been ruled by rigid landscaping codes, and elderly residents sitting comfortably on their porches without fear of harassment. The battle against corruption had given them something priceless, the right to live in peace. And as James planted a new row of tomatoes, he knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, this community would stand together, stronger than ever.